Hello. Welcome, everybody. I don't know if my microphone's on. You're going to have to nod in the back if I'm loud enough.
Closer.
Closer. Oh, so eat the mic. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, my name is Meredith Cole. I am a mystery writer, and I live here in Charlottesville. So this is my favorite holiday of the year, the Festival of the Book. All these great writers come here, and that we get to see them. So I'm excited today for our panelists. This is Southern Fried Crime. So if you're looking for, I don't know, poetry, you stumbled into the wrong space. Get out now. No, please. I'm really excited. It's always fun to see all the mystery fans every year. And then also I get all these great mystery authors. So the Festival of the Book is a program of Virginia Humanities. It's a statewide organization whose mission is to connect people and ideas to explore the human experience. Please silence your cell phones. Don't be that person. I told my panel, I'm like, you always make this announcement and then one of our cell phones goes off. So make sure you, so we're on airplane mode. So our families will live without us for the next hour. Just a little reminder, there's a bookseller here who's going to be selling their books, and they're going to be in the back of the room signing, and you'll have a chance to ask them more questions and get them to sign the books. So please make a note of that if you haven't already bought their books. And we'd like to thank the Virginia Festival of the Book's premier sponsor, Michelle and David Baldacci. I've heard of him. Okay, so many of these events are free of charge, but they are not free to produce. Please support the festival. You can give using one of the QR codes designated for giving. And we also need your input. So I was told that we're locking the doors and you're not allowed to leave until you fill out the form that they give you and hand it in. Now, and this is my pitch for it. If you fill it out, they read these very carefully. And so if you say, please never have Meredith Cole come back and moderate a panel ever again, then I won't be back next year. But if you say I was amazing, they may offer me another panel next year. So just so you know. And then you could also say, I'd like to see more of, I'd love to have so-and-so come. They read these. So please put in your feedback. They want to hear from readers and people who come. So, and then just a reminder that up here, if we only represent ourselves and not Virginia Foundation for the Humanities or the University of Virginia. So I'd like to welcome our amazing authors. Right next to me is someone that I have fortunately or unfortunately known for years. It's super fun to have him, talk to him, and I actually interviewed him on my podcast, which is called The Writer's Story 2 months ago? Yeah. 2 months ago. So we're just going to rehash a lot of that, but no. Steve Weddle, he's the author of The County Line. You want to hold it up and wait so people find it. An Amazon first read selection. His previous book, Country Hardball, which the New York Times called Downright Dazzling, is a collection of connected short stories. He's a former newspaper editor. He is the co-founder of the crime fiction collective Do Some Damage and the co-creator of the noir magazine Needle, and has taught short story writing at Lit Reactor. And he lives, and I'm not going to just say Virginia, he lives in Louisa with his family because we got a local crowd here. Okay, next to Steve is Aggie. Before turning to fiction, Aggie Blum Thompson covered real-life crime as a newspaper reporter for several papers, including the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. Her forthcoming thriller, Such a Lovely Family. Wait a second, it's not forthcoming anymore.
Came out last week.
It's here. It's here. It's available for sale. This was written obviously ahead of time. It's a tale of suspense and psychological depth. Aggie is a member of Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America, and International Thriller Writers, and serves as the program director for the Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Writers Association. She lives with her husband and 2 children in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. So we're going to try something I haven't done usually on a panel, and I'm going to have them each do a 5-minute read. So you get a sense of their voice and their story. And I can use a timer if that's helpful. Steve said he's going to be brief.
I did. I did not promise that.
And lean into your mic. Sorry. It's a little
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate seeing all of y'all out here. And so what I'll do is read a little bit. This is about a bulk of the book is about an outlaw camp. And these are the outlaws who are making their way towards the camp. They have run out almost completely of ammunition, but not guile. And they're attempting to rob a bank in the lovely town of Hazleton, Arkansas, which is a fake name because I didn't want to use the name of Hope, Arkansas, because the tie to the Clinton crime family. And so I called it Hazleton. And then later in the book, I went ahead and named Hope anyway. So there we are. Everett walked the manager to the back of the bank, told him to open the safe. This is too easy, Everett thought. Finally, things are going our way. As the white-haired bank manager reached to pull the safe door open, Everett saw him smile and lean back, just as a shuffling sound came from inside the safe. At the front of the bank, Jimmy the Hook waved the empty shotgun in a slow arc through the room, easing around the four men lying face down on the floor. It'll be over soon, he said. You just have a good story to tell your wives when you get home. Just make sure you end up home tonight, not at the undertaker's. They bury heroes around here, you know, he said, going on and on about how everyone should stay calm, and they did. A few doors down from the bank, Beans stood next to the car in front of the bakery, wondering how quickly he could get in and out with a piece of chocolate pie. Did they have him sliced and on the counter, just waiting? He listened for shots from the bank, yelling, but didn't hear anything. Hey, buddy, a man coming out of the bakery said, you can't park here. He motioned to the car and said, how much is a piece of pie in there? Beans asked. A what? Pie, a piece of pie. I don't know, a nickel? The man pointed to the car again. You're going to get in big trouble if you don't move that car. Beans turned around to look at their car as if it could have changed in the last minute. When he turned back, the man was gone, or maybe he was still there, but Beans was looking through the bakery window for a nickel slice of pie. The man inside the bank safe made a move toward Everett, but Everett kicked the man, and I don't know if are we PG-13 here? What are we, R, yes. G? We're PG-13? Slammed the safe door. Kicked the man in his nether regions, shoved him in the back, slammed the safe door closed before he knew what was happening. A shot went off inside the safe, muffled but still loud, followed by a high-pitched squeal. Everett collected himself, saw the banker's hand had been caught in the safe. The banker trying to pull his arm back, it being wedged in there pretty good now. When Everett had been 7 or 8, he'd come upon some older boys torturing a calico cat. And the sound the banker made reminded him of that, of the sounds those boys made when he was done with them. Everett looked around, saw Jimmy putting the butt of the shotgun into the temple of the man who decided now was a good time to make his move. Let's get, Everett said as he and Jimmy left the bank with only the guns they'd come in with. Beans was standing near the car, but not near enough. Back turned, he hadn't heard the commotion. Let's go, Everett said. Beans heard them, turned with half a slice of pie in his hand, half in his mouth. He looked at the pie in his hand, did his best calculations relative to the amount he'd spent on the pie and the amount of room he still had in his mouth, decided against making the attempt and set the rest of the slice on the ground beside him and moved to the car. The people who'd been inside the bank a minute, the quiet, behaved people, were now running out onto the street, boldly screaming, they're robbing the bank, they're robbing the bank, which, while being highly unusual in Everett's experience, was, he thought, demonstrably false. 2 men in overalls and caps came running toward the car until Everett raised his gun, fired a shot at their feet, which slowed them down. Another man, young, weighing maybe $120, white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, came rushing at Everett as he got into the car. Everett was yelling at Beans without meaning to, and Beans took off down the road, heading any way that was away, the name of every road he'd ever heard falling clear out of his head. Do I have a minute and a half left?
Yes.
Okay, we're going. Here we go. Jefferson Fabbis was tending to his goats when he heard the racket from a couple of blocks away. He'd spent the week reading about various bank robberies and kidnappings in one of the detective magazines he'd been reading that morning, True Detective or Actual Detective or Dynamic Detective. He couldn't remember which. There'd been a bank robbery and hostage story that Inspector Joe McDougal had ended when he'd shot out the tires of the gangster sedan. Jefferson Fabbis turned to get his rifle from the house. The rifle good mostly for killing any varmint that got on his bad side. But then he remembered he'd given the gun to the Elam boy in town to hold for collateral a few days back. He looked around the yard at the goats and the fallen fence posts. The car was coming up the road to his left and would have to turn at the edge of the land, make its way back past him on the other side. He grabbed the first thing he could find and ran to the fence by the road. As they turned the corner, the sedan caught itself in the ruts, veered to the edge of the road. As Beans was riding the car, he made another turn, nearly overcorrecting himself right into a fence, but settling down as the guns and Jimmy in the back seat fell to the floorboard. Jimmy was yelling, "Slow down!" while Everett was in the passenger seat, hanging out the window, firing behind them, yelling, "Go, go, go!" Beans saw Jefferson Fabbis at the end of the road, just this side of the broken fence. The man squatted, then uncurled himself, his arms extending, an unwieldy tree stump flying through the air at the car. Beans swerved, the tree stump landing, bouncing, rolling, catching the corner of the car veering into the fence. Ka-thump, ka-thump. Then through the small field, the unplanted rows, up and down, gin-soaked drunkard, spinning around, falling downwards. Ka-thump, ka-thump. The first bump had sent Everett's pistol flying from his hand. The next thud had sent his head into the ceiling of the car. After that, it was all punches to the head, the shoulder, the elbow, a glancing blow to the temple, then a solid cross to the jaw. At one point, Everett saw Jimmy fly by on one side of the car to the other, the two meeting midway as they flew back to their respective sides. Everett, frozen in space, caught a boot to the forehead, somehow went face first in the floorboard, then suddenly found himself sitting upright, pretty as you please, eyes blinking like in that uncertain moment when you're just waking up in someone else's house. A thud, and Everett watched as something flew past the car. He wiped water and mud from his face, but pulled away his palm to find hair and blood. He patted himself more before realizing, "God damn it, Beans, you ran over a goat."
Woo. I love that you read it faster and faster. That was really
I was trying to hurry up. I know. I mean, you can.
Yeah. I was going to cut him off, but yeah. It was too exciting.
That's a tough act to follow. I hope you can lower your expectations back down to where they were before Steve started reading. On the other end of the spectrum of action and excitement and humor, well, I hope not humor, is a psychological thriller where a lot goes on inside people and less so in car chases and bank robberies. So can everyone hear me? All right. So my book is Such a Lovely Family, and I like to describe it as Knives Out at a Chevy Chase garden party. So here we have our prologue. Everybody loves the Calhouns. They're such a lovely family. Tom and Ginny Calhoun have lived in the same house on Sycamore Lane for 35 years and raised all three children in their classic white colonial with crisp black trim. So what in the world are the police doing here? The neighbors gather in small groups to gawk at the squad cars parked askew on the wide tree-lined street. The sirens are off, but the cars' flashing blue lights announce their presence. What happened? The neighbors whisper to each other as an ambulance arrives. Was it Tom, his heart? The consensus is no. Tom, with his thick for a man in his mid-60s. Maybe it's Ginny, one woman says. But no one takes her seriously. Ginny of the wide smile, always in her tennis whites. She can run women half her age around the courts. Must be one of the children. They were all here for the party this afternoon. Sniffs one neighbor who has never appreciated the noise that the Calhoun's annual cherry blossom party brings to their quiet street. It's bad enough that the tourists descend on the Summerwood neighborhood every spring to photograph the explosion of blossoms, but the Calhoun party seems like such an ostentatious display of wealth. Can't be Nate, another neighbor says about the Calhoun's middle child. Such a wonderful young man, a marine biologist, I believe. I hear he's in from California for the party. I certainly hope Ellie Grace is not involved. She's the whole reason I joined Instagram. I love seeing what she's up to. Well, that leaves Trey. It's what they're all thinking. The eldest Calhoun child was kicked out of 2 DC area prep schools and military school. His father pulled some strings to get him into college. Everyone knows Tom made a DUI go away for Trey as well. After 2 years of college, Trey dropped out and left for LA to work in the movie business. Things went south, and now he's back, living in the house next to his parents, a bungalow they had bought for guests. But everyone's pulling for Trey. Despite his youthful mistakes, he has so much potential, and it's been wonderful for Ginny to have her oldest son back. She really dotes on him. If anything happened with Trey, she would be devastated. Ask Renee, someone says. She'll know. Despite their superficial differences, Renee Price and Ginny Calhoun have been close friends for years. The two are often seen walking their dogs together, French bulldogs for Ginny and a Bichon Frise for Renee. Renee sits at a cocktail table in the Calhoun's front yard. Hours ago, it might have been a party guest she was chatting with. Now it's a police detective questioning her. The Calhoun's front yard was recently filled with guests in their spring finery, friends, family, select neighbors, sipping cocktails and chatting. Nature had obliged, providing cherry blossoms in peak bloom as a backdrop to the party. And now the evening breeze sends those little petals fluttering onto the grass like freshly fallen snow. And the guests have been joined by dour-faced uniformed officers and several plainclothes detectives. The white bunting swapped for yellow caution tape. Renee hugs her little dog to her chest. From the way she keeps glancing at her house across the street, it's obvious that she wishes she were back home and not in the middle of a crime scene. She's already told the police what happened, how she was in the powder room when she heard the loud pop, pop, how when she opened the bathroom door, her dog had bounded away from her. She had followed, calling Mumbo's name, worried he might be headed for the kitchen to inhale more of the bacon-covered scallops. But no, he was heading deeper into the house. She had followed and caught a glimpse of her Mumbo tugging at a blue and white check tablecloth from the party that lay crumpled on the floor. Only when she got closer, Renee told the police, she saw it wasn't a tablecloth at all. It was a blue and white gingham dress with a pair of legs sticking out akimbo, drenched in blood. No, Renee won't be going home for a while.
Thank you to both of you. So I had sort of some general questions and then some specific questions, and then we will open it up for questions. So think along those lines of what you would like to ask these folks if I don't cover it. And then if you don't do your part and ask some questions, I will ask more questions. Just so you know. How would the two of you define Southern crime fiction? Can you say what makes it unique?
No, please, Steve. I insist.
Don't jump all at once.
Yeah, I know when we talk about Southern crime fiction, a lot of times we're thinking about 20th century, and we talk about Southern fiction, we're thinking about the Faulkners, the Flannery O'Connors and things. I was reading, I don't know if Arna Bontemps, he was born in Alexandria and wrote about Gabriel's Rebellion over in Richmond, and it's Southern writing, and there's a lot of crime there too, and I really enjoy his writing. So Southern, I think when we talk about Southern fiction, particularly Southern crime fiction, what we tend to mean in the general discussion, I think, is family, dialect, religion, church, these sorts of things, and I don't know that those are exclusive to the South. Of course, I think in different areas you have different churches, different families, different dialects, and everybody has their own. And I know that some books may be able to kind of straddle the thing between Southern fiction and normal fiction, or just crime fiction. And I don't know, I was thinking about your question, if you moved my book outside of the South, what would it look like? And I don't know if it would be, a book anyone would want to read, but I know it's not a book that I would want to write, because the things that I am interested in are the family, the South, the dialect, and the South. The South still has the Civil War hanging over it, I suppose, which you don't necessarily get in Idaho as much. So there's always that there. But then there's also the family, and religion, and our own little dialect. But again, other places around the country and around the world have their own dialect. So there's my non-answer. I hope you found that helpful.
We'll see if Aggie's more helpful.
I will be less helpful than Steve. I think for me, what makes my book a Southern book is I really tried to tap into a sense of hospitality and genteelness. And like Steve said, family, the emphasis on the family unit, and certain values that might strike people as old-fashioned or traditional in other parts of our society today, but which are still upheld, I think, quite strongly in a lot of parts of the South and in people who leave the South. And DC is a really interesting place. Is DC a Southern city? I mean, I think it depends on who you ask. I grew up in New York. To me, DC is a Southern city. I know that people maybe from Louisiana would say, no, absolutely not. But there is a lot of there are a lot of families who are very traditional and have a very strong emphasis on church, on family, on a kind of a, not to get political, but like a patriarchal approach to a family. And I really wanted to tap into that. My matriarch in this book is someone who puts family first and will do anything for family, and has poured every ounce of her creative energy, her intelligence, and her skills in life into her home and into her family. And so I think, you know, whether you're talking about like 1930s and Depression era, like robbing banks, or you're talking about you know, modern day permutations of like the family looks like, there are just so many different ways you can express Southern crime fiction.
Great. So I'm going to follow up just with a specific question for you. Did you research the lives of the wealthy in suburban Maryland for your book? I mean, as a reporter, I'm sure you already done a lot of research on crime, but maybe you needed to do some research in that way. What was that like before you started writing?
So a lot of my inspiration just comes from eavesdropping and watching people. I was in a fantastic backyard barbecue once when a very powerful DC woman said something along the lines of, well, I'm just exhausted driving from every country club around the DC area because little Tyler turns out to be a competitive swimmer. You know, when we enrolled him at the club, we were just trying to teach him how to swim. But next thing we know, he's in nationals, and I'm down in Virginia at their club. You know, and this is just a certain thing that you can't really research, but you observe in people. When I need to do research, I like to go on Redfin and look at how rich people live. I go to their homes and I say, well, what would a house like that be like in Potomac? And I do a lot of research that way. So that's really fun. I don't dare actually show up at these open houses, but thankfully with the internet, I can get an idea.
Awesome. Steve, your book is not just crime fiction, but historic fiction. How much research did you have to do to get the details correct?
All of it.
You're not that old.
No. As I say, I linked a lot of the books and journals and things that I used on my website, which is downrightdazzling.com for some reason.
I've heard that phrase before.
And so I did a lot of research by going through eBay and finding old, historical magazines, old journals, old diaries. And one of the cool things is when you're reading, the Wikipedia rabbit holes that we all go down and, just discover the things. I go down to the reference things, and some people, I've been given to understand that it's not a requirement to buy all of the source material. That said, I buy all of the source material. My eBay bill is substantial.
That's
Tax
tax
write-off,
deductible. Yeah.
Which grateful for that. So thanks, Obama. So so I've got all of these like old magazines, like Modern Farmer from 1926, that sort of thing. And as I said, I was talking to somebody the other day. When you're talking about 1933. Columbia County, Arkansas, it wasn't exactly Broadway, it wasn't exactly the quote unquote first run of things. So when you're talking about songs or movies or cultural things, you kind of have to shift the time a little bit and think what might have been popular, for example, in Chicago or in New York 6 months before or a year before, things like that, and then kind of move it because, it takes a while for things to get down the road, as it were. So some of the historical stuff is tied to the time and some of the time before. But again, one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I really enjoy researching that era, particularly 1933, where all the gangsters were alive, and then the next year they were all dead or in jail. So that's a turning point before, as Roosevelt was screwing everything up. It was a really nice time in 1933. So yes, a lot of research.
A lot of research. So when writing your books, did you start, and we could just talk about these particular ones. Did you start with characters, setting, or plot, or did you start with something else altogether? And you can start, Steve.
I like to kind of plan things out and to kind of plot the whole story out so that I get it up on the storyboard. I tend to write ideas down, and like on the left-hand side of a notebook and on the right-hand side, I do the creative stuff. so that as I'm writing the stories to go along, he did this and she did this. And then I'll think, oh, I should put something else in, or this other thing. And the other part goes on the left-hand side of the page. So in doing that, I was able to kind of craft the story. And as I crafted the story, the characters became more apparent to me. I sort of started, they would do this, they wouldn't do this. There's that kind of author cliche of the character spoke to me. They just did this thing, and I was just kind of, it's like, okay, that's a little artsy for me. That's not how I make them do the things because I own the ink, and so they do the things I tell them to. But sometimes I ask, we start doing things and they go down, and I do get surprised at times. But for the most part, I kind of start with story and the idea, and then the characters sort of reveal themselves. But at the end, you end up, feels like, wow, the characters are the main thing. When I read a book like Aggie's book, all of the characters have secrets, and you get a little at a time and a little at a time, and you think you have them figured out. So it's fascinating to read someone who is a master at dealing with these secrets in these characters and keeping you, just waiting and just giving you enough and doling it out. So I am very interested to hear her answer. Thank you.
So, Steve's book is rich in people and setting, and you can see why your writing process works for that kind of book. I think of my books as like mental Jenga puzzles. It's a puzzle essentially, and a puzzle first. So I need to have an idea of what sort of not the reveal exactly, but what are we doing here? Like, what's the thing that I'm working towards? I don't have to have it figured out 100%, but I can't just start writing. I need to have a really strong sense of, this is a story about, a sister betraying a sister or something. I have to know where I'm going vaguely. And then what I need also is a sense of a setting or a vibe. And then I need the opening thing that gets everything going. And I can't sit down to write a word until I have all this. So I do a lot of walking with my dog in the woods or gardening or other things. And, it's often, the way I look at it is, you can have one good idea, but one good idea is not a novel. You need to have several good ideas to take you through 90,000 words. So it's a little bit like being a magpie, where you're collecting a lot of little good ideas. And then at some point, this may sound artsy, synchronicity happens. Like, you realize these 3 good ideas work together. And that's when I get going. So for me, it was like, I knew I wanted to do something that was Agatha Christie-esque, Knives Out-esque, meaning, I don't know if you're familiar with the term locked room, but the idea that's a limited number of suspects, a limited space. And I knew I wanted to do something with rich people behaving badly, which is one of my favorite tropes. And then I was so the cherry blossoms are a real thing in DC, right? Like, it's a massive thing. And where I live, we're right near Kenwood, which is a suburban neighborhood that has a lot of cherry trees and is sort of the alternate place to go to besides the tidal basin. And one year I was there with my kids, and my husband, who's the most laid back, chill guy in the world, wandered up onto a lawn where there were people because he thought this was like some kind of public event. And someone tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Oh, this is a private party." Well, he was fine with that, but I thought, now that's a good place for a murder. And so then I knew, okay, this is where I'm going to set my locked room murder with rich people behaving badly.
I remember hearing a famous thriller writer, who will go nameless, say that when his characters don't do what he says, he kills them.
Okay.
So that's just a suggestion, Steve. I don't know.
Good to know.
Good to know. Your books are both full of flawed and might I even suggest some unlikable characters. How did you work to make sure that we identify with them and stay with them for the story? I know sometimes we are pushed to sort of say, like, your protagonist has to be, Luke Skywalker-esque or whatever.
So this is an interesting topic. I think something writers debate a lot, which is writing unlikable characters. And I think I love an unlikable character as long as I understand why they're doing what they're doing. So I don't worry about whether my characters are likable or not. They're probably not that. What do you think? They're probably not that likable. But hopefully they're understandable. You know why they're doing. You understand their motivations. what's happened to them in their past, how they see the world. Because I think we'll stick with an unlikable character as long as we can see the world through their eyes or understand why they're doing what they're doing. I think what's frustrating is when we see someone making choices that don't make sense to us, and so we lose that affinity. But it can be really fun to follow an unlikable character as they mess up their lives and other people's lives. So I don't worry too much about if they're likable, just that they are relatable in some way, that you can understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think the characters that I dislike the most are the people whose motivations I don't understand. So I think that's a good point. You know, when I'm writing a novel, if I get to a chapter about somebody where, I don't know if you've read the book, but they're the Rudd sisters, Henrietta Rudd and Abigail Rudd. When I get to a chapter with them, from their point of view, it's their book. I rethink the book as their book. When I get to the book, when I get to the sheriff and he's doing whatever he's doing, this is his book. The entire story is his book. So I sort of reimagine everything from his point of view and write from that point of view. And so I try to focus on those characters. And as you know, as said, the idea of understanding why the character does the thing is really important. And I think we'll go a long way with characters who, you know, maybe we don't like what they're doing, but we understand their background, we understand their motivation. And, you know, the trope or the idea is that the hero, the protagonist, is the person who is a dynamic character who changes, and the villains or the static characters, the ones who don't change for the book. And so I always try to keep in mind that everybody arcs. You know, everybody kind of moves through the story, and at the end, you know, you want them to be in a different place than they were at the beginning, not just the main character. So I really try to focus, as I'm writing, on each character and having the book be that character's book while I'm writing the character.
Great. It's so interesting. You both have a news background. How do you feel that helped you in becoming a novelist, and how did it hinder you? I mean, did anything that you learned feel like it got in your way, or did you feel like it was really helpful?
Well, I think it was helpful. It encouraged me to find other sources of income. So,
Wait, are you saying the newspaper business isn't doing well, Steve?
Yeah, some newspapers are doing very well. You know, what I found was, you know, the local newspaper that I worked for, you know, I was taught to and follow through on really focusing on particular stories. And I would imagine that your news background really helped you with the sort of rich people doing bad things kind of thing, because I got that sort of taste of crime. And I cannot impress upon y'all how impressive, I suppose. Look at the author saying the same word twice. How great it is to read a book where you're always turning the page to find out what the character's secret is. So make sure you pick that one up, because it's fantastic. So I would imagine a lot of that came from news reporting too, particularly the rich, mean people.
I can't emphasize enough how much being a newspaper reporter helped me. And I really wish there were more newspapers around still for young people to come up in. I learned to write every single day. My first paper I worked for was the Wilmington Star News in North Carolina, and I wrote 3 to 4 stories a day. And I couldn't be precious, right? And as a writer, he's dying. You can't be precious. You keep writing. If you make a mistake or you do something poorly or not as well as you would like, the next day you just keep going and you keep writing. And you learn to be edited. You learn that other people are reading your stuff and are going to have reactions to it that you might not agree with or like. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you still have to keep writing. I learned to talk to all different kinds of people as a police reporter. I mean, literally, I was like a New York Jew in North Carolina. It was like it could be like a sitcom. It was really funny. And I was out there every day with my police scanner. I had a fantastic time, met all kinds of people. And all those are really great qualities for writers, to get out in the world and to experience life and not just sit at home in front of their desk. I mean, look, I'm sure there are many writers who do wonderfully doing that. But for me, I found it really enriching to be able to go out in the world and interact with all different kinds of people. And finally, it helped me in terms of crime writing, because I'm familiar with how a case works. I know it goes from incident report. I've read just hundreds of incidents, not thousands of incident reports. I know how detectives differ from uniformed officers. I know, I know people I can call up and say, is this a reasonable thing to charge someone with, or am I just making this up? And I appreciate those people. So I just think it's terrific training ground for writers.
One thing I've learned from meeting so many crime writers is the ones that came up as newspaper people, they are always like, what's writer's block? They're like, you got to write, you write everything. So do you both write every day? And if so or not, where do you prefer to write, and sort of what time of day? Do you have any of that sort of preferences?
I do not write every day, and I'm here to strongly encourage people who are intimidated by the axiom to write every day to rethink that, because the only thing that counts is if you're getting your writing done. It doesn't matter, to me, in my opinion, if you write every day. And I write when I'm not gonna say inspired to write, because that sounds a little too frou-frou, but I write when I know what I have to write. And if I don't have it in me, there's no point in sitting down and jamming out a bunch of garbage words and just to erase them later on or delete them later on. So if it's not coming, it means I haven't done the pre-work. I haven't thought through, like Steve said, I haven't planned out enough, or I haven't thought through what I'm writing, because I don't like to waste time at the computer. I don't like to write. There are different kinds of writers out there. Some people write and then they have to edit back, 50,000 words. And I don't want to be in that position. I like to keep what I write. So no, I don't write every day. I think every day about my book. I might be doing research. I might be reading other books that help me. I love reading memoir. I think memoir is a terrific kind of hidden secret for fiction writers to tap into emotion and all kinds of stuff. But so I like to think I'm working in some way every day, but no, I don't write every day. And also because I have kids and all kinds of crazy stuff, I don't have a set schedule at all.
Yeah, I think the newspaper certainly helped the writing every day and the not having the writer's block. And, I get up every morning at 4:00 and work on writing every morning. And sometimes it's reading and sometimes it's writing, but I'm working on a story or a book every morning, every day. I'm working on the prequel or sequel to this one. I haven't decided yet. I'm also working on a much different book. It's the search for the lost Harpo Marx sex tape, which could be lost or legend. But I am working on a couple of different things every day, and so I find that helps too. When you're working on a newspaper, you have a story deadline. You have a story that you have to write. When you're working on your own stuff, unless you are on deadline and the deadline is next week, you can vacillate a little between different sorts of projects. So I find that very rewarding, but I always want to be working on something, keep the brain moving, because, I don't know if I'll ever get the momentum back, because I get older every day and things get more sluggish. So I like to kind of keep the wheels moving.
4 a.m.
Whew. Yeah, I know.
I can't decide whether you're a middle of the night writer or an early morning writer. That's rather early. Do you have any recent books that have really inspired your writing? I know I'm opening this up as is dangerous for Steve, because he's going to tell me like 100. But you mentioned memoir. Is there any memoirs that have been really inspiring, or I'm putting you on the spot?
You are putting me on the spot. I just read a book called Little Panic. I don't know if this will be helpful for anybody else, but it was a memoir of a woman's life with panic and anxiety disorder. And one way in which it was fantastic is she this is a gruesome image, but she just bled all over the page. I mean, she was just emoting nonstop about what it's like to live with panic disorder. And I actually found that really helpful as someone. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes tapping into emotion is difficult for me in my writing. And I go to memoir because people who write memoirs tend to really tap into their emotion and let that all spill out. So that's a book that I read recently. And in terms of crime writing, if you're interested, I love Louise Cavendish. She's a British writer. And I think I just finished The Heights, which I really enjoyed. I think she's an excellent and kind of undersung contemporary crime writer.
Awesome.
your podcast co-host wrote a fabulous book, a most peculiar book about the Bible, which I found fabulous.
Kristen Swenson.
It was a wonderful book in terms of the history of the Bible and where things come from and kind of understanding that. So I found that inspiring, particularly as I'm working on the prequel/sequel to this and working more in religion. The next book is my my argument with the Word of God. So it's good to do some research on that. But I recently read, or just came out, I suppose I read it last year in draft form, Chris Harding Thornton's book, Little Underworld, which is about 1930s Nebraska, Omaha crime. And it's fantastic. It's a little more urban, Omaha, Nebraska, but it's 1930s and it's just fantastic. And Kent Wascom's new book, The Great State of West Florida, is the fourth in his, as they said about the Hitchhiker's book, increasingly misnamed trilogy about the Florida, Louisiana coast. So Kent Wascom's book is coming out, I think, in May. So Chris Harding Thornton's Little Underworld and Kent Wascom's Great State of Florida are a couple of really fantastic historical fiction books that I've recently enjoyed.
And before I open up for questions, which I'm about to do, tell us again what's next after this you're working on. I mean, you just had your book come out. I'm sorry, but
Yeah,
I
my
know
book just came out last week, and I've turned in book number 4, You Deserve to Know, which will be coming out sometime next year. And right now I'm in that sort of netherworld of coming up with the pitch for book number 5. So I've been doing a lot of collecting and magpieing and walking with my dog to try. And so if you have any ideas, you can reach me at my website.
come by her book.
If anything
and then,
crazy has happened in your neighborhood with your neighbors, please let me know. Always looking for ideas.
I'm having fun with the Harpo Marx book. I don't know if y'all know, but in 1933-34, Harpo Marx went over to Russia and did some spy work for the United States, which I found a surprise. He came back with some documents taped to his sock. And so
we still don't know how effective he was at this spy work.
We do not know what the documents were still to this day. And so I find that fascinating. So that's kind of a present day, but also going back to 33. So I'm really enjoying that. That's what I'm working on, as in addition to the next book in kind of this, what's becoming a series.
Awesome. All right. So questions? Yes.
How do you interact with your editors?
All right. So I'm gonna say the question again so everyone can hear. The question is, how do you interact with your editors?
Well, this book was published by Lake Union, and so they, in terms of how much do we interact with them, or how often, or in what medium? What was it?
Yes.
Any and all of that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I send them the book, and then they make some notes, and they spend a few weeks reading it, and they send it back to me, and they say, okay, you got a week to fix everything. All right. So they contracted out with a guy called, also worked with them was a guy named David. Hello? Was a guy named David Downing, who, if you need any sort of editorial help, it was fantastic. Perkins Editorial, I think. His name's after Maxwell Perkins. So fantastic. So they would send back notes. And this may be a little too in the weeds, but in line edits in Microsoft Word sort of thing. And so they would make suggestions, and I would say, I don't like that suggestion. And they would make other suggestions, and I'd say, I am very embarrassed to have made that mistake. Thank you for catching it for me. I am a very stupid person. And so, for the most part, there was one big thing. The big change, I think, for this book in terms of editing was the ending. I had a much different ending. And so somebody said, this has happened and this has happened, and we
You
really
can't kill everybody,
we
Steve.
feel like I killed a lot of people. There was no limit on the number of people I could kill. I was like George R.R. Martin going through that town. But and I'm sorry to my wife who had to read that in draft form. That was rude of me. But the ending, they suggested that certain things had happened, so we needed this sort of ending. And I said, well, that's a lot better. Thank you very much. So the people who work with me earned their money and then some, because I was difficult, I suppose.
I don't believe that, but
I've had the same editor for all 3 books, and like Steve said, I've never met my editor. I think the way publishing works today, it's pretty rare to meet anybody that you work
you
with.
don't have martinis.
We
and,
don't. We go for these long martini dinners. No, I've seen her on Zoom once. Like, I really couldn't pick her out of a lineup. Like, we have no We don't have that kind of relationship. So I send her the book, and then maybe a month later, I get back an editorial letter, which will be about 2 pages, talking big stuff, theme, idea. And then, as Steve said, they'll go through, this is kind of just normal standard procedure. They go through the manuscript, and they'll just make little notes along the way about, is this realistic, or add a little emotion here, or wait, she was wearing a red shirt. Why is she wearing a blue shirt now? Or kind of what day is this happening?
Oh,
Stuff
I
like
hate
that.
that
And you're
question.
like, oh, I have to figure that out. I don't want to figure that out. But you do have to keep a timeline in your novels. And then you send it back to them. And then they send it back to you again saying, you did a great job with these edits. Now, can you just fix this one more thing? And then you send it back. And then the proofreaders get a hold of it and they send it back. And those people are angels. Those people really save your butt, because they will find the inconsistencies, or how you change someone's pet from a frog in the first chapter to a lizard in chapter 9. And they're fantastic. And then that goes back. And then is it the copy editors after the proofreaders, or the copy editor first? And then finally the proofreaders. And they're still finding mistakes. And they're amazing. These people have eyes. These people catch everything. And also, is it Kramer Books Cafe, or is it Kramer's Cafe? A lot of the things we think we know, we don't actually know, but they know, and they'll find out. And then that's it. Then it's off. But the relationship is purely an electronic one for me.
The fun thing is to get that little note in the margins that says, so Tuesday had 37 hours, right? So, I got to fix that.
Gosh, darn it. Next question. Yes.
Steve, you've touched on a couple of these issues already, but I'm interested in the research and the specificity that you talked about. Guns and cars in the book both blew me away, because I don't know a whole lot about either one.
Oh, that's good. I was worried there for a second, then you knew. I was almost in trouble.
So what was your question? Like, did he have to research guns and?
It's actually not that. It's about your changing point of view, because your main character, Cottonmouth, is a great character. I really enjoyed reading about him. But you mentioned that you did a lot of shifting of point of view to other people, and I wonder why you made that decision, and how easy it was for you to do that.
Okay, so the question is, Steve had a lot of shifting of point of view. Cliff, as you tend to do when you read a book, I think fell in love with one of the characters and was like, why did you change to all these other characters? So Steve.
Yeah, I think both of our books have a lot of characters in them, and in her books, you're kind of moving from chapter to chapter for different people, and you get new secrets. I don't know if I've mentioned, but there's a lot of secrets in this book. And so in mine, you move from chapter to chapter, you jump out of other people's heads. In my short story, my interconnected short stories, there was a story in there where I realized as I was writing the story that I, as the author, was kind of in some way a camera following people around, and I moved from one character, and then they talked to this character, and then I carried the camera with that character into a back room, and I was like, oh wow, now we're in this back room, let's see what they're talking about. So it was very weird to kind of pan through a room and pick up different characters. But in this book, each chapter is kind of, as Cliff mentioned, from a different point of view. And so I have, as you might have guessed, a lot of voices in my head. So it's nice to have a way to structure that in pages and then get paid for it. It's very nice. And so I think about the Rudd sisters. There's two of them. There's Henrietta Rudd, who was what you might call a tough old broad. And then there is Abigail Rudd, who could generally be called a bit of a lush. And so they're very different characters. So I was able to kind of bounce them one off of the other and kind of create some dialogues. And one person might do a thing and one might do the other. But then the surprise is having this one do something that one might do, but then having to go back 8 different places in the previous 200 pages and seed that, so that you, as the reader, when you get to it, you're like, oh, well, this makes perfect sense. And it's like, well, the reason it makes perfect sense is because I cheated, because I did the thing, and then I went back and built to the thing. So sometimes dealing with the different characters does get complicated in that sense, because I'm having to go through and make sure that they all line up. And that, as you were talking about, when you were talking about unlikable characters, making sure that their motivations are, who they are and what they would do. So each character, I do try to bounce around, but be true to that character.
Right. So multiple point of view is really, really challenging. And so they're very talented in order to pull it off because you have to listen to different voices and all that kind of stuff. Next question. Oh, yes.
The question is for Ms. Thompson. I noticed on your website, you wrote a couple of books before you were able to get published. I wonder if you could comment on the trials and tribulations of trying to update your novel.
Okay, so the question
hard.
is, the question is that most writers don't get published on their first manuscript. Yeah, I know, it's shocking. And so what was your journey like?
So my journey is the little engine that could. I wrote my first book in the 90s when I was in my 20s, and I got an agent and I got close. I got what's called a revise and resubmit from a publisher, and then it went nowhere. And I was like, oh, shoot, I have to get a real job. And I became a newspaper reporter, and I wrote a second crime novel, and the same thing happened. And then in my early 40s, I wrote a third novel, and the same thing happened. This was an international thriller, and I was told, we love your writing, but women don't read international thrillers, and men won't read international thrillers featuring female protagonists. Can you write a domestic thriller? I have that in writing, by the way, from several editors.
They
So
didn't tell you to be A.B. Thompson.
I submitted that as A.B. Thompson.
You did.
I did. And they said no female protagonists. Right. So I did write the domestic thriller that was suggested, and that's how I finally broke through. So, I mean, a saner, smarter person would have self-published or gone into horticulture or something, but I just stuck with it. But yes, it's very hard. So any aspiring writers out there, just know that this is normal, and it's not a reflection of the quality of your work. It's a business. So just keep going.
Steve, do you have some unpublished manuscripts in a drawer?
It's possible I do. Yes.
Just possible. Any other questions? Yes.
So is it possible that we will see some of those earlier works
Oh.
in future published form?
So the question is, someday will you self-publish or bring those out and try again?
I won't. And I think that's partially because I'm just a forward-moving person. Like, I just like to do the next thing. I don't want to go back. And part of it is that, as Steve might or Meredith might be able to tell you, unfortunately, in today's world, like branding and kind of carving out your area is really important. And as much as you'd love to just write, science fiction and then a rom-com and then a mystery, it makes it really hard to get traction and to get going. So I'm doing this kind of mystery and thriller right now, and those books don't fit into that world. Although, Steve, I'm also, my secret passion project is a historical mystery, and I might have to get on a Slack channel with you and talk about that. But that would be like a big departure. And so that's something you don't really know before you enter the writing world, that you will, for lack of a better word, be pigeonholed. You will be asked to kind of represent a genre, and you don't get to just write whatever you want, whenever you want.
Unless maybe if you're about 5 or 6 books in, they start letting people. And then, of course, Nora Roberts can do whatever heck she wants.
But you're making a change, right, Meredith?
Yeah, I'm writing thrillers these days as opposed to traditional mystery where I started. But it is hard. It is hard to try to change that, with editors. So.
But it's not just books, though. It's music as well. You don't want a completely different album from, whoever.
Beyonce?
There you go.
Beyonce can do it. Why can't we all
I
do
thought
it?
Steve was suggesting I was also a musician, and I was going to say, I don't think we know each other that well. Okay. Another question?
Well, can I just say one thing I wanted to add on what Steve said? He said something about coming up with something brilliant and then seeding it in. And I think that that's also really kind of like a secret, is that writers rewrite, that our first drafts are nothing like our later drafts. And you're going to discover things, even though you claimed you didn't, you will discover things about your characters, and then you'll have to go back and see that stuff in. So I also say to beginning writers, never be discouraged by your first draft, because nobody's first draft looks good. We all go back. Writing is rewriting. And I think that's one of the things you were getting at. And that's certainly true for me. Like, I don't even know who the murderer is in my books in my first draft. I'm writing to find that out as I go. And then by my second draft, I have it figured out. So
Yeah, I think the quote that I heard that I like a lot is a first draft is just a writer telling the story to herself. And I think that kind of helps me think of it.
Well, it also sounded like you guys have really different styles of starting. So if I were to, in the terminology of plotter and pantser, I would say that you're sounding much more like a pantser, and that Steve's sounding much more like a plotter.
Yeah, with the T's and with the D, because the plot, this is 10 years in the making. So I'm a plotter and a plotter, but hey, there's some clever wordplay here today. What are you gonna do? The newspapers trained me up well. So, but yeah, I have to have the cork strips and the whiteboards and things like that. So I have to see it.
I do like a good whiteboard. I do like a good, serial killer type of room with a string going. Yeah, I think that's just aesthetically pleasing, but it doesn't actually help me. Right.
But it sounds like you have some ideas, but you're really trying to see where the story goes and let it sort of happen for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm very much a plotter, but I think I've learned to be a little more flexible. And I think different books can call for different things. Some things are so complicated that you're trying to keep track of, 100 people, and it's really hard. And then other ones you're like, oh, let me just sort of see where this goes. So nothing's perfect, but I do usually recommend when I teach writing that people try to start with a basic outline and at least see if they have enough for a book. Because sometimes a question could be, is this a short story? Is this a book? For me, I also write screenplays. It could be something different, but to sort of explore that and make sure, yes, you have enough before you start writing.
Yeah, many a writer has gotten to the 20,000 word mark and realized they don't have a book. So
They have a novella, or not even.
It's like, well, I got nowhere to go. It's
The end. And then they woke up. By the way, never start your book with anyone waking up to an alarm clock. Just a little pro tip there for you. I've read a bunch of writing contests, and that is quite often how people write their try something different. Surprises. Thank you so much to both of you. This has been really wonderful. Thank you to our wonderful audience and your questions. And if a burning question has just popped into your head and you would love to talk to them, they are going to be in the back. We're going to let them get back there. Books are for sale, and they're ready to sign them and answer any other questions that you have. So
I'm going to ask if everyone could stay seated for 1 second while I do a selfie with Steve.
yeah.
I'll turn all the way around like the human.
And don't forget about your the papers they're going to give you. You're going to be able to give your feedback. So she's coming down the aisle right now. Remember, the doors are locked. And if everyone doesn't participate, then we can't leave and go to our next event. So.
And thank you to Meredith for moderating.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
And Meredith, what are you working on?
Oh, and we have two. We don't have enough time for me to try to pitch it to you. It's in that
A
stage.
book.
It's in that stage. A book, thriller. Thank you.